Hello and welcome to The Human Frequency, streaming live on AmericanFreedomRadio.com and archived on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TheHumanFrequency. I wanted to belatedly thank all of our fans and listeners with a happy unthanksgiving. Sharon, did you enjoy your unthanksgiving?
I had a great unthanksgiving. We didn't have any turkey, and we didn't hang out with any family members. And
it was glorious, if I may say so myself.
A lot of people I talked to did not make turkey this year and did not get together with their families. So I think it has been a great unthanksgiving, which is also good because while in Portland, we neglected to visit Unthank Park, which is a real park in Portland.
What?
And Unthank Park. Only in Portland.
I really have nothing to say to that. I mean, it's just, how can you respond to that? That's the name.
Only in Portland. So happy on Thanksgiving. And we're happy to be back this week with our first three-time guest, Ken Rohla. And Ken Rohla is a brilliant mind and a good friend of ours. He is an electrical engineer, a scalar energy expert. He is the guy with a cure for everything. And he has a website called freshandalive.com where you can find a lot of these great supplements and energy devices. And Ken is also a raw vegan. So I'd like to introduce Ken to the show and ask you, Ken, what did you have for Unthanksgiving?
Pork skins.
Well, I did do Thanksgiving, and I'm not vegan anymore. I eat a little bit of butter on rare occasions, maybe a little fermented dairy from time to time.
Interesting.
But yeah. I years ago, I started noticing as I got into my 50s that my bone density was going down, and so I tried a lot of different things, and I'd studied the work of oh gosh, my mind's gone blank. Anyway, I forget. But and decided to introduce some animal fats into my diet. So I started eating raw Amish butter,
Okay.
and that helped quite a bit.
That's interesting. Yeah, butter gets such a bad rap. I think that people are saying you should use margarine instead, and butter's bad for you and it's high in fat. But I think that margarine and butter substitutes are so much worse for you.
Oh, clearly. I mean, if you talk about just the GMO aspect, certainly. But
although Smart Balance is no GMO now, but it's full of chemicals.
Butter is definitely a boogeyman. I mean, it has been that way for a long time, I think.
Yeah, and I mean these oils, they do have their negative side effects. All animal products are going to concentrate whatever toxins the animal ingests. So milk and dairy and butter tend to concentrate radioactive elements. They tend to concentrate toxins. And so if you're doing those kinds of things, I mean, really, if you're eating anything these days and drinking and breathing, you've got to be detoxing these toxins out of the body. But you have to pay particular attention to it if you're eating animal products. And so, I was not attached to any dogma. I mainly wanted to maintain my health, and so I did what I needed to do to bring my bone density up. But I find I don't have to eat it very often,
Okay.
Maybe on average 2-3 times a month.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a real quandary because, animal products, even butter and milk and things, it's part of a very unsustainable system of creating that. And so, but at any rate, I'm not totally vegan. I would say, probably at least 95% vegan.
Okay, well, that sounds very healthy. I mean, for me, I've gone in and out of different diets and was vegan for years. But now I'm not. But I'm what Laura Eisenhower called a flexitarian. So I try to eat very healthy. I eat mostly vegetables and fruits and grains. And then, yes, a little dairy. We do eat a little meat, but only organic chicken sometimes and fish. But, those things, they've got to be done sparingly, I think.
It is sparingly
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
That's it. And, Weston Price is the person I was trying to think of. He was a dentist who traveled around the world studying different cultures and studying their health. And what he discovered was, that sugar would really radically alter people's morphology and bone structure in a negative way, and that animal fats would help remineralize the body. And I spent years attempting to remineralize my body with plant-based fats, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it fast enough. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I switched to adding a little bit of animal fat in, and it did the trick. It didn't take a lot, but it did the trick.
Well, while we're on the subject of bodily intake, I wanted to ask you. We've talked about Ormus on both of the previous shows that we've done with you, and I wanted to ask you specifically because a friend of mine gave me a bottle of Ormus that he made from scratch, and it's just in a little container, and I guess you're supposed to shake it, and something about using a dropper and taking it very very similarly to how we took the Rad Detox that we got from your website. But I needed to know, how exactly is Ormus supposed to be taken? Like, is it supposed to be on a empty stomach or a full stomach? Are you supposed to take it with water or without? I mean, what's going on with the Ormus?
Well, you're supposed to take it in a natural form in food, actually, or water. These alchemical forms, was it like a white, milky liquid?
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, that's typically made with what's called the wet method, where you take some kind of sea salt and mix it with lye, and then you basically precipitate this silicate powder out of it, and you filter it off and you rinse it off and you get rid of all the lye, and you're left with a silicate powder. And if you do it right, it can be in a concentrated amount of Ormus kind of locked into the silicate form. But it's not very bioavailable, and it's also not in a form that the body really recognizes. And what it'll do when you ingest it, particularly if you ingest too much of it or for very long, it will plug into the acupuncture meridians, which are nodes of these Ormus minerals. It'll plug into the brain neural pathways, it'll plug into the DNA, and it'll raise the superconductivity of these places, which normally is a good thing, but with these alchemical forms of Ormus, it does it too fast and in a manner that's not natural. And so what winds up happening is it will ultimately throw you out of balance, very often physically, but also especially emotionally and physically.
Oh, wow.
Everyone I've ever met who did much of this alchemical Ormus were always manifesting nightmares for themselves, or they were crazy or emotionally and spiritually very disturbed, and of course we're in denial about it very often. And so what I tell people, and I've always told people to do this, because I did this. I mean, I experimented with alchemical Ormus years ago and discovered this myself. And all of the ancient teachers that taught about this stuff, they said the same thing, that the best way to get it is in natural forms. If you take those concentrates, those alchemical forms like these silicates, using the wet method in particular, and you feed it to plants or you feed it to ferments and then ingest that, then you'll get the benefits of it without throwing yourself off emotionally or spiritually or physically. Or you can take them and vortex them in water and magnetic fields and alter their structure to make them in a natural form. And so that's what I tell people to do. I know some people who have taken alchemical Ormus, really strong stuff and well-made stuff, for years, and they're absolutely brilliant intellectually, but they're manifesting nightmares for themselves, like government agents following them and accidents, like getting in car wrecks and all kinds of things, because you cannot short circuit the spiritual lessons that you came here to experience. And so a lot of times people want to create Ormus and ingest it kind of as a magic silver bullet to get what they want in life. But, the way that you get what you want in life is by doing the spiritual practices and learning and understanding spiritual techniques, because what they really are simply showing you the way the universe works, the way the multiverse works, so that you can navigate through it in a balanced and healthy way. So if you're trying to short circuit that and cheat with these alchemical methods, then you wind up manifesting problems for yourself in the long run.
Well, that's good to know, and I will, of course, beat the crap out of my friend on my own time. But this is good information.
It's very, very common. I see that happen a lot, and I just tell people, take it and feed it to your plants, feed it to sprouts, feed it to ferments.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to feed it to our new plants.
Yeah, we just planted.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I do.
We just planted our new privacy. We replanted our new privacy hedge today that our neighbor haphazardly destroyed.
Well, for anybody following the saga of our hedge, our sagebrush, we talk about it a lot. So we've replaced it now with nursery plants. the sagebrush that was destroyed.
So I will be taking a little tincture drip out there.
Yeah.
And how much would you suggest that I give to the? It's just like junipers and what's the
Photinia.
Photinia.
And I can't remember the other one. I'm trying to remember. See, I'm not good with the plant names. I'm trying, though. I'm trying to be better with plants.
Maybe I need to take some Ormus so that I remember these.
But yeah, we would like to feed the plants. It's a great idea. So yeah, how do you feed Ormus to a plant?
Oh, well, with a precipitate like that, if it's well made, about a tablespoon per gallon of water will do it.
Perfect. We'll
Yeah,
do that.
I do that with mine. I take various things that are high in Ormus and feed them to my plants, and we get crazy growth. I've got basil plants 4 to 6 feet tall that are like
Perfect.
giant bushes.
We need privacy fast.
Yeah.
So
and it's
great.
nutrient dense. When you do this, you don't get these chemical abominations. You get very healthy, normal plants that are very robust, very disease resistant, very heat and cold resistant, very nutrient dense.
Well,
and they
cold
taste great.
resistant. Cold resistant is important.
It's
'cause
freezing here. I can't get warm.
We got our first snow about a week ago,
Yeah.
and yeah, we need that.
It was an organite snow, by the way, Ken. We totally helped all of the whole western coast. On our last week's episode, we talked all about it. We went up to Portland, Oregon, and now we've created a line of about 1,000 miles of coastline with busted cell towers and organite distributed. That's about 1,000 miles. And after we did Portland, Oregon, we neutralized about 200 towers there, and we did a bunch on the way up and on the way back. And after all of that, the weather pattern completely changed, and all the rain started coming through the entire coastline.
The whole coastline from Vancouver to Tijuana, it was just a blanket of precipitation. It was absolutely unreal, and it was a couple of days after we got back.
It was awesome snow, late November snow. So that's great for California
good.
for breaking drought here. I was going to ask you a little bit about the wild weather you've been having in Florida, because you described the hurricane situation there and the destruction. And I'm so happy to hear that your house wasn't harmed by it. Do you think these weather events were man-made?
I believe they were certainly engineered. If they weren't created, they were certainly directed and fed, because the Hurricane Matthew that came up through Florida, I believe in early October, it before it got to Cuba as it was coming north, I was looking at it on live satellite, and it had fractal patterns and longitudinal wave patterns in it, which is a sign that scalar interferometry is being used on it. Scalar interferometry is using these antennas that generate scalar waves, which are a form of subtle energy that they can send very large amounts of energy into an area and heat up the atmosphere and change jet streams and change the weather patterns and direct hurricanes or feed them, even create them. I've seen them where they just created them out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was an indication that it was being engineered. And then, of course, it came up the east coast of Florida, which is extremely rare for hurricanes for that to happen. Usually they either go north of us or they go south of us and head to the west, or else they go and head north. And also there are people who have put devices like Organite and other stuff around Florida and are protecting the coast. So I know on the east coast of Florida, we've got a lot of that protecting the east coast. So typically for the last, as a matter of fact, if you Google Florida hurricane drought, you'll see that from 2004 until this year, or 2005, we haven't had a hurricane in Florida. And I believe it's because of these scalar devices that people have put out.
Mm-hmm.
Because typically you would see these storms, these hurricanes and tropical storms would come up from the south, and they would either just fall apart when they started getting in the perimeter of these devices, or they would bounce off and go out to sea and fall apart.
I was
I was
reading
very surprised.
in Don Croft's book, he mentioned the hurricane situation in Florida and having distributed Organite around, and the hurricane stopping after that.
Exactly. Don Croft has done it. A bunch of other people have done it. I know people that have done it. And there are people putting power devices around that are much stronger than Organite as well.
Right.
And so I when I heard about Matthew headed our way, I wasn't concerned at all. I figured it would just fall apart or bounce off and go out to sea. And it actually did stay off the coast of Florida. It stayed about 50 or 60 miles east of the coastline until it got up to northern Florida and Georgia, and then it kind of started swerving in a little bit. But the track was different than what the weather forecasters were expecting, and I'm sure it's because of these various scalar devices that have been positioned along Florida.
I think it's very interesting that they're manipulating the scalar energy of the atmosphere, but that we also can use the orgonite devices to undo those crazy effects. And what I find even more interesting is that whatever the natural weather is somewhere, that's what the orgonite or the orgone energy or scalar energy device will do, is bring back the natural balance. So it seems to have, it has the same sky cleaning effects everywhere, but the weather effect is a little different from different regions, I think.
Well, exactly, and it's because first of all, these orgonite devices and these scalar devices, what they typically do is they change the ionization of the atmosphere. They clean the pollution out of the atmosphere, and all these charged particles, whether it's geoengineering pollutants or nuclear fallout or just air pollution and heavy metals and usual stuff. All this man-made junk that's in the air floating around creates charged particles that create very strong charge, which creates very strong weather of whatever kind. And then when you look at different geographic areas, weather is also, of course, it's dictated by geography, water, bodies of water, and the heat and the climate of the area, but it's also dictated by the underground rock formations, because the crust of the earth is full of geological rock formations that channel the scalar energy coming from the center of the earth and modulate it into different frequencies. So those underground deposits will affect the weather as well, and that's why you see, for example, places like Sedona, where they've got a lot of underground crystal caverns. They'll affect the weather and naturally clear the geoengineering pollutants and keep the weather in a certain way.
And those formations, that's, I'm assuming, is how you get things like lenticular clouds.
Well, yeah, in the mountains,
Yes.
they generate the scalar energy too. See, I always explain that the Earth is a scalar energy or an orgone energy generator, and that's why we're seeing the cleanup sometimes as if orgonite was distributed, even in other places where there isn't orgonite, but maybe a mountain range or some kind of natural formation that is generating.
Precisely. It's like, I have friends who live in Sedona, and Sedona, just from its geological formations underground, would clear the geoengineering and keep it cleared. So whoever's doing the spraying has to use scalar interferometry to counteract that effect to make the chemtrails hang longer.
Absolutely.
And so, and then people have gone into Sedona and put scalar devices of various kinds to counteract that. And so there's this battle going on. But you're right, in certain areas, places are naturally protected. Mountains are scalar wave transceivers, just like their antennas, just like a pyramid is. Or other types of devices. They capture the energy coming from the center of the earth, they capture the energy coming from the sun, and then rebroadcast a localized field. And in the case of mountains, or anything that's cone shaped or pyramid shaped that's made out of these high Ormus stones, they will create a double helix vortex up out of the tip of the mountain or the pyramid or whatever the form is, and that double helix spiraling vortex of energy will go up into the atmosphere, and if there are clouds up there, it will slice them up and create these lenticular clouds. So that's what you're seeing with lenticular clouds. That's why places like Klamath Lake, Oregon, for example, they grow algae in that lake for human consumption, and they test the algae, and it hasn't shown nuclear fallout in it. And the reason is because it's surrounded by volcanic mountains. It's surrounded by extinct volcanoes. They're high in Ormus. Volcanic rock is high in Ormus. So it creates these scalar vortexes all around that clear the atmosphere and send the pollution out into space, or neutralize it, just flat out neutralize it.
Well,
so you do have that natural protection.
Well, on our last show, we talked about the Obelix, which is a quartz crystal that's wrapped in all of the noble metals. It's wrapped in gold leaf, silver wire, copper wire, aluminum wire, and iron wire around the bottom. And what is done is when you aim the largest face of the top of the crystal to the sun, according to your explanation, I believe you mentioned that it collected scalar energy rather than was a generator of it. Can you go into a little bit more detail about this device? I don't know how familiar you are with the Obelix, but we've used them in sky cleaning and to great
It
success.
blasts the chemtrails out of the sky. It's the fastest way I've ever seen it done.
As just as much as a chembuster, in fact. But we've noticed that it's specifically for sky cleaning rather than neutralization of EMF sources, for example. Can you go into a little more detail, at least from your scientific perspective, about how a device like the Obelix works?
Yeah, and I have seen them. You have to understand, first of all, that crystals, they contain these monoatomic elements, these Ormus elements. And Ormus elements, monoatomic elements, are not conventional minerals or metals. They are multidimensional matter. And this has been shown scientifically. David Hudson and others have shown this. Hal Puthoff, the Russians, and various Russian scientists have shown this. That these monoatomics, because they're in a very unusual state, a monoatomic form for a metal is a very, very unusual state. And as it turns out, it's interdimensional or multidimensional. So these minerals, rather than being metallic looking, they look like white ceramic powders, but they exist simultaneously in three-dimensional physical space, and then they also exist, part of them exists simultaneously in other frequencies or dimensions of time and space. So they connect multiple frequencies of space-time to our three-dimensional physical world or universe. And they're within a lot of natural substances. They're inside of minerals and crystals, and particularly the platinum group metals and gold, silver, mercury, copper. They're very high in these monoatomics typically. And so silica and quartz are very high in it. And so when you've got a crystal like that, they naturally are antennas or conductors for this energy that's coming from the center of the earth and from the center of the sun, because this scalar energy, what it really is superluminal light. It's superluminal light that is light that goes far beyond what we've been told is the speed of light, and it has an intelligence behind it. So I liken it to God consciousness. And this energy is flowing out of the centers of galaxies, and it's kind of like the entire multiverse is this web of black holes. The centers of galaxies have these black holes, the centers of suns have these black holes, the centers of planets have them, and our body is a web of black holes. The acupuncture meridians, the brain neural pathways has these deposits of Ormus minerals throughout the neural pathways of the brain, which each one of those are little black holes, and the DNA is loaded with these Ormus minerals, so you've got this web of black holes along the DNA. So the entire cosmos is this web of black holes, and they're interlinked, so the energy coming out of the centers of galaxies flows and is relayed through the suns and the planets through their centers at those singularities, from sun to sun to sun and outward to the planets. So when it comes to us, it's coming down from our sun and it's coming up from the center of the earth. And these crystals also have these monoatomics in them, and they will conduct it as well. And these monoatomics can conduct extremely, extremely weak fields from many, many light years away, these scalar fields and gravitational fields and other energies, what scientists would call cosmic energy coming down to the earth. These crystals can pick it up, and then it rebroadcasts it in a localized field, and it also, in a case of a pointed crystal, it will create a vortex coming out of the tip of the crystal. So when you line or coat or encase the crystal in metals like the ones you're talking about, whether it's in gold foil or spirals of wire or whatever, what you're doing is creating waveguides that will concentrate the effect of the crystal, and it can tighten up and direct a scalar wave vortex up out of the tip. And so if you do that well enough, and you put it outdoors, that vortex can shoot up into space, and it will act like a vacuum cleaner, because the scalar waves are kind of like, they're vortexes, and the apex of the vortex, in the case of a device like that, is going to be a long distance away from the crystal. And where close to the crystal, the vortex is going to be, the big open end of the vortex is going to be where the crystal is. And as it goes up and away from the crystal, it folds in on itself just like a tornado. And so the apex of that vortex is going to be a distance away from the crystal. And if you make it strong enough, the apex can be out in space, and it will act like a vacuum cleaner, and it will pull these particulates out of the atmosphere, and it will change the ionization of the atmosphere, and that will clear this pollution. And when you clear the pollution and you balance the ionization of the atmosphere, then you get normal weather
You know, we've
for
done
that
that.
area.
We've done that with Obelixes and Organite, and it is a magnificent sight to see. I have a lot of pictures of those funnel-shaped clouds
Yeah,
that
we see
happen
the
because of this vortex you're describing. I really appreciate that you can explain it scientifically and demystify it a little, because people are very mystified by the strange clouds they see when we do sky cleaning, and some people are afraid of everything they see up there because it doesn't look like what they think the sky looked like when they were kids. And we'll find out soon enough that the skies have always been this way in our lives, and the engineering of our climate and of our planet has been going on since before any of us were born. But more about that later. We plan on asking you about the reptilians and the ETs, but in regards
Well,
to
yeah,
how
but
this stuff,
the natural progression
right?
of topics.
But in regards to how this stuff cleans up, many people are mystified by it and they're scared of everything they see. And then there are other people that attribute it to magical beings and don't recognize our own power, that we're doing this, that we have the consciousness to do this, and that we have the knowledge to make devices that are working in harmony with these universal elements. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how this relates to consciousness, because you recently did a lecture, which I wish I could have been at, but it was in Florida, called The Physics of Consciousness. And
That's going to be released this week on
excellent.
YouTube.
I'm
That'll
excited.
be out this week. Yeah.
See, we
Yeah,
reshape
it does.
reality.
It gets into this.
See, we can reshape reality with thoughts, and I'm already doing this, and Gabe is doing this, and I know many people are beginning to be able to shift the timeline and literally create the world using positive thoughts and prayer and working with our own orgone energy inside of us. So what I appreciate is that you can scientifically explain it. And I wanted to ask, what is the literal scientific mechanism by which our thoughts are creating this seemingly external world?
Well, understanding that a lot of what I've just said by conventional scientists would be laughed at and scoffed at and considered nonsense, but there are in fact heavy-duty scientists around the world proving this, including some Nobel Prize winners, and people who are maybe not Nobel Prize winners, but still luminaries in the field, like Roger Penrose and Alexander Golod, Russian physicist Alexander Golod, Nikolai Kozyrev, and Konstantin Mile, and a whole slew of people. So even these people who are highly acclaimed, the moment that they start talking about this stuff and explaining it, they will get vilified by the establishment. So it's important to understand that, when people listen to this stuff, I mean, even when I first got exposed to some of these concepts 30 years ago, I thought it was nonsense because I was basing what I knew on what I was taught in school. And it wasn't until over time I experienced practical applications of things that what I was taught did not explain, that I had to start looking at very advanced physics from cutting edge people. So it's important for people to understand that these things that we're talking about are kind of at the forefront of science. So you're not going to be seeing this, from Bill Nye the Science Guy or Neil.
We had a guest call him Bill Nye, by the way.
And Neil deGrasse
Exactly.
Tyson.
Exactly. These guys are, they're shills for the status quo.
Absolutely.
And, they're paid very well to maintain that.
Mm-hmm.
But
and
that's
even those
par
guys
for the course.
That's par for the course.
Yeah,
with
but
the
even
mainstream
those guys
narrative.
are changing their. Yeah, these guys they are changing their stances as they're being dictated to. So, for example, just a few years ago, both Bill Nye and Neil
deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, they said that, the chances of other life in this universe is infinitesimally small, and now they're saying, it's infinitesimally large, or extremely large. And,
whatever they're told to say.
Well, of course it's
Precisely.
infinitesimally large. I mean, how could we be the most intelligent things in this universe?
Well, exactly. I mean, it stands to reason, but the conventional line from NASA and the establishment has been that, oh no, the odds of other intelligent beings like us being in the universe was next to nil. And of course, now all of a sudden, NASA has officially changed their position and saying that there are billions of planets in the in our galaxy that could support life, like humanoid life.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to understand that these concepts that we're talking about are not recognized by the status quo. And so you have to look beyond that to the people who are really at the forefront of science and physics, which is what I do, and this is what I teach about. But how this stuff works with consciousness is that, as I mentioned, this what scientists are calling scalar energy. There's been many other names, as you mentioned. Orgone. Wilhelm Reich called it orgone. Tachyon energy, torsion waves, torsion fields. David Wilcock calls it the source field, prana, chi, and all these different names for this. What it is superluminal light. It's light that goes way beyond the speed that we've been told the speed of light goes at. And it goes so fast that it actually appears black to us. If you use our conventional instruments to try and measure to look at it, it looks dark to us or invisible, and so scientists call it dark energy or dark matter. But in fact, it's light that's traveling so fast that we don't see it. And so, as I mentioned, it has an intelligence, and it spirals as it's flowing, and it branches as it flows. And that branching is known as fractaling, and it's this recurring pattern of branching, much like in a tree. You can look at the overall pattern of a tree, and it's got a certain fractal pattern, and you can zoom in on one branch, and it's like a duplicate of the whole tree, basically. And that's the concept of a recurring fractal or a recursion. So this energy is flowing out of galaxies. It's spiraling and zipping through the cosmos. It passes through matter like it's not even there, because matter is predominantly not composed of solid stuff. It's predominantly composed of space that's filled with this energy, with this scalar energy. So it's zipping through everything, and it slows down and it coagulates into the matter and conventional electromagnetic energy that we can see and measure. And it's consciousness that does that. It's actually consciousness that slows it down. So we collectively and individually create our reality by taking this God consciousness, and we act as conductors of it or antennas of it. And so in that sense, we are the hands of God. We're like a piece of this giant fractaling matter energy system, or this giant circuit of energy. And at our scale, we capture it individually and collectively, we slow it down, and we manifest matter and energy with it. And this is how we create our reality from a physics standpoint, from an energetic and matter standpoint. And we're all connected. Like I said, it's all part of one giant circuit of energy. And so the energy flows and it's recycled, and those cycles and recycles create polarities like plus and minus charge, male and female, hot and cold, light and dark. All these polarities that we see come from the fact that this energy spirals and cycles over and over again.
Most people don't have any idea that any of this is possible, or that we have this creative power. And I've been also, one of our guests, John Robson, who's a chembuster maker, an orgonite gifter in California, he was saying it's not that we have power, but he quoted Greg Braden, and that we're just all of us, every single one of us, in a constant state of prayer, because we are constantly with our thoughts manifesting our world. So it's not that we have this power, it's that we're doing it all the time, whether we know it or not. And this is why it's so important that we can be in control of our own minds and not be subject to...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're conduits of this energy. And if, you can either create your reality by default by unconsciously not understanding how it all works, and just kind of hit or miss, unconsciously manifesting a reality and reacting to stimuli like an amoeba, or you can consciously be aware of it, understand it, which is really what spirituality is all about. All these spiritual practices, what they're really about is understanding the true nature of reality so that we can navigate through it and live in it in alignment with it, so that we live much more easily and much more harmoniously with much more joy and abundance. And so if you understand the concepts of how this works, you don't need to understand the physics. You just need to understand the concept that, yes, you can focus on this energy coming from above and the energy coming from below, like many practices do, like Qigong or Tai Chi or Ayurveda or Kundalini Yoga and these things, where they take energy, you do meditations or body work or energy work, where you're capturing energy from below and bringing it up through the root chakra and through the feet, and down from above through the crown chakra and into the head. and then visualizing creating what you want with it, or healing in the body, or things like that. It's because this energy can create and alter matter. So when you're consciously directing it and doing things with it, you can have absolutely amazing results. And you can also see through the manufacturing of people's realities that's going on this planet. This mind control that's going on the planet. The powers that be know very well about this and have for thousands of years. And this is why they spend so much time and effort to manufacture and dictate and manipulate perception and consciousness on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
It's because consciousness creates reality individually and in mass.
I think this is why Wilhelm Reich's work was suppressed ultimately. I mean, we can always link it to the FDA and the cancer industrial complex, suppressing a cure for cancer with the orgone accumulator. We can look at it as the weather modification and terraforming was already going on. And when he discovered orgone energy cleaned the atmosphere and ended drought, that was something the powers that be did not want. But there's something much deeper than those things. And that deeper concept is that this is the universal God consciousness. And through orgone energy or scalar energy, we become ourselves again, and we recognize what we really are and what we're really doing every day with our minds and our thoughts.
Precisely. And also too, the people who seek to suppress it, their perception of what they're suppressing varies depending on their awareness. And so it's kind of like, what you're aware of and the reality that you live in is dictated by your level of awareness and consciousness. And so for some people, like in the case of Wilhelm Reich, let's say, some people would look at what he's doing and say, oh, yeah, we don't want these competitors to the cancer industry. But at a higher level of consciousness on this planet, the people who are more aware, they look at the fundamentals of what he was looking at. For example, bions, and this concept that you can take a vacuum tube and heat it up to a couple thousand degrees and sterilize everything inside of it and have it completely sealed. And yet these life forms will just blink in and appear out of nowhere and start creating life inside these vacuums. And so that's a fundamental concept, that life can be created anywhere, even within places that are supposedly too hot or that have been sterilized or whatever. Life just spontaneously shows up. And that fundamental concept, people at a higher level of awareness on this planet don't want average people to understand that, because they don't want to understand how things really work. They don't want people to understand their true power, because if they understand their true power, then they can't be controlled and manipulated.
We were in LA the other day, and we're from LA, but we don't live there anymore, but we go in there pretty regularly. And every time I go back, it's like a horror show. I mean, it gets worse and worse all the time. And this time I knew going in that it was going to be an energetically difficult day, because they're suppressing rain on the West Coast. So they're hitting really hard with energy weapons and geoengineering. So I knew it going in, but, I handled it with calm, and Gabe and I were there together, but everyone around us seemed so much even more zombified than the last time I was there, which wasn't that long ago. I think this mind control matrix is very, very all-pervasive, and if you're aware of the current event of Kanye West's so-called breakdown or outburst, Kanye West is now 39 years old. He's been in the music industry a very long time. He's at the top echelon, and he is MK Ultra mind controlled, and so much so that I know that Tila Tequila, who is now out of that matrix, talked about the MK Ultra. She's very open about it now because she's quit that industry and she's able to say whatever she wants. So she was openly describing what the breakdown was. The mainstream media said this was an emotional breakdown. He's unstable, and he needs to be hospitalized for his own good. What actually happened was he said, Google has lied to you. Facebook has lied to you. We are all equal. He said that over and over again. He said this whole thing is a sham. And he did this at a concert.
In so many words.
In Sacramento. He did this, a 10-minute rant at a concert, and walked off stage. And now he's been hospitalized, which means he's being reprogrammed because his programming was breaking down.
I just want to add a quick little disclaimer that we do not pay attention to to anything modern in any way. Pop culture is just, it's anathema to us for the most part. However, we did happen to catch the story and we found it very interesting because it is, as Sharon said, it's an example of the programming breaking down. And we're going to start to see more and more of this as the frequency fence is dismantled.
Well, I actually do pay attention to pop culture, but mostly in this context of
Well,
how
maybe I
how
should
it's,
speak for myself.
Yeah, how it's used for mind control. I don't listen to Kanye West's music. But I did find this thing to be very interesting. I found it to be very brave of him to put himself on the line like this and risk his own life. And if you listen to his rant, it is clearly an anti-Illuminati rant, and the mainstream media is portraying it as an emotional breakdown and something against Beyonce and Jay-Z, which it's not.
He's even
It's
saying
more about
even saying in the rant that he's putting it all on the line to get this message across.
He's going to be hurt for this. But anyway, the reason I bring this up is I thought this was kind of huge that one of these guys is coming out about this. And I wanted to ask you, how does it happen? How does the programming break down in such a dramatic way so suddenly for an individual?
Well, it can happen in different ways. I've actually helped some MK Ultra victims to break their programming and heal from it. And the way that you do this programming is by trauma, and usually drugs are involved, sometimes electroshock and other things. But in general, it's trauma. It's repeated doses of trauma, and usually severe trauma, sexual abuse, and things like that. And what happens is when the mind is exposed to trauma, it disassociates. It's a safety mechanism, a natural safety mechanism of the mind, so that when you're in a severe trauma, say for example a car wreck. I used to work in hospital emergency rooms. You would always see when people were in car wrecks, when they would come to, they would ask you, what happened. You could tell them what happened, and then 2 minutes later they'd ask you again what happened, and they would just keep doing that. And it's because the mind was shutting down and compartmentalizing and disassociating from the trauma and saying, that wasn't me, that was so horrific, that wasn't me, it didn't happen to me. And it locks it away and compartmentalizes it. And of course, it's still there hiding out in the unconscious mind, but the conscious mind is not aware of it. And so, this technique of shattering people in this way and traumatizing them repeatedly and drugging them and things, it's been around for thousands of years, but it's become very, very sophisticated in the modern era, particularly since World War II, when the Nazis used it extensively on individuals and on the mass public. And Hitler really refined it quite a bit, with the horrible experimentation that he did on people and his followers did on people. And they learned a lot about it. And of course, when World War II was over, a lot of those Nazi mind scientists came to the United States because, when any war is over, the victors go in and take the spoils. And so the United States and Great Britain and Russia went into Nazi Germany after the war and were in a race to get as much technology and all of the things that they could. And so the United States and Russia predominantly got their mind scientists and their rocket scientists and their space programs and their technologists and incorporated them into...
Project Paperclip, I believe, is what it was called. The official term
for
the assimilation of them into their new homes, as it were.
Exactly. And so the incorporation of these Nazis into our military-industrial complex, into the Russians, was responsible for the space race, for example, which was really a race to weaponize space, because we had the top Nazi rocket scientist Werner von Braun. The Russians also had top Nazi rocket scientists, and we also got their mind scientists. And so these guys were doing horrific experiments in trauma-based mind control. And rather than suppressing that, when they brought these scientists into our military industrial infrastructure, they radically expanded it and ultimately evolved into the 60s, to the point where it became, leaks were coming out to the point where it was starting to get exposed by the early 60s, to where the CIA at the time had to do spin control to make the American public and to make Congress think that it was the Russians doing it, not us. And so, for example, they funded the movie The Manchurian Candidate, which basically put the spin on it. It presented the concept of mind control to the public, but put the spin on it that it was those evil Russians that were doing it, not us. And and so those programs, have been expanded ever since. They pretended to shut those programs down in the 70s, but in fact, they were just made more hidden and expanded. And so now Hollywood is very much immersed in MK Ultra trauma-based mind control because you can, first of all, you can use these people to perform in ways and to present concepts and ideas through the media and through movies and stuff and their music to not only mind control people, but also to keep their consciousness in a lower vibrational state of fear and competition and anger and all those kinds of things. And so more and more of these people have been coming out over the years. Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor were some of the first that really came out and testified before Congress and got this stuff out maybe 20, 30 years ago. But since then, more and more people have come out, particularly celebrities like Roseanne Barr and some of these child stars, and people talking about, because it's also linked to pedophilia in the porn industry and other things. So you're seeing, because of the energies coming down onto the planet, where the Earth is moving through parts of the galaxy now where this scalar energy is coming in at frequencies that's busting this programming, and it's making everybody squirm and have to basically, get real and
Right.
and the
That's a good way of
lies and
putting
the
it.
subversion. Yeah, but it's basically it's making consciousness. It's making consciousness such that lies and the hidden is becoming known and more public.
Yeah,
And so these people have
it's
been.
being accelerated.
Right.
Something that's already underway is being accelerated.
I think we're all accelerating it too through these very things that we were talking about, like organite gifting and making powered scalar devices that are, bringing the weather back to normal. Well, when we bring the weather back to normal, we get back to normal too.
That's true. And there's something very significant about the location of Kanye West's supposed meltdown.
Oh, yeah. Sacramento. And Sacramento is the site of extensive organite gifting. It was a very low energy place that was the kind of place where every time you went through, you were wondering how anyone could live there. The last time we went through Sacramento, and I'm serious, I've been through many times being a Californian going up and down the 5, but I don't mean to insult Sacramento. It's just been energetically compromised. And we gifted there, but there's also somebody named NorCal Weather Warrior that you can look up on Tumblr who did a ton of gifting in the Stockton area and the whole county. And I think into Sacramento, and I know that a bunch of our stuff got distributed there. The fact is that
saturation of that whole region where there are a lot of cell towers.
The last time we were in Sacramento, which was just a couple of weeks ago going through, it was a different place. It was transformed, and it was so transformed that I wrote a blog entry about what happened in that region of Stockton and Sacramento. And that is where Kanye West's supposed breakdown happened. Well, I'm thinking that the orgone of the region was so high from all this organite tossing, it happened right around there. And that's where it happened. And I would like to say that we and NorCal Weather Warrior are a part of this. I hope we helped him. I hope he's going to be okay. And I pray for him, actually.
Yeah. And in disabling enough of those sources that would normally be mind controlling him to continue to put out
the Illuminati message
through his music or facsimile thereof. So the idea here is to quiet that so that maybe someone who's up there who has this enormous amount of influence starts to think, wait a minute,
what's
this
going
isn't
on
right.
here?
Yeah, this isn't right. Like just snapping out of a haze of some kind. And it is just that. It's an EMF haze. And just thinking, wait a minute, this is true, this is not true. And suddenly connections are made, and then it's not long before you think, I'm going to just say what I have to say because I have to. I've done the wrong thing for so long, and maybe it's about time that I put the right message out. And I'm sure somewhere in the back of his mind he was thinking there'd be hell to pay for it.
There is, probably. I really pray for him. That was a brave move.
It was. And I never thought I'd say it about someone like him, but hey, you can listen to the rant. It's on YouTube.
Go on YouTube and look at the full rant. I mean, he's really putting it all out there.
And he lets the expletive fly.
Yeah.
But it is amazing.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, I don't pay too much attention to pop culture and the media these days, or even people coming out exposing mind control and stuff, because for me it's very old hat. I was
Yeah.
exposed to this stuff 30 years ago. And so my focus now is on actually doing things kind of behind the scenes that I can't even talk about a lot of
Mm.
times. I had a really interesting meeting last Sunday with a guy who taught me about how how to stay alive when you're, let's say, a whistleblower or somebody who's doing good for the planet, um, against the powers that be. It's like, for example, Danny Sheehan. There's a guy named Danny Sheehan who is the lawyer who led the Watergate trial, the Iran-Contra trial, Karen Silkwood trial, which won a large settlement against the nuclear industry, and all these public interest cases. And this guy was very, very highly credentialed, a Harvard lawyer, brilliant, brilliant guy. And he won these cases. And the way he stayed alive was by learning about how, basically, honestly, how the assassination system works on this planet and how to counteract it. And so I had a very interesting conversation with a security expert who knew about this stuff. And it actually reminded me very much of when I first learned about trauma-based mind control 30 years ago, because when I learned about it, it really shattered my worldview. I found it very difficult to believe that I lived in a world where these horrific things happen. Because when you read the details of how this stuff works, it's really horrific: torture and sexual abuse and drugging and all kinds of stuff.
Hmm.
Just awful, awful stuff. And for people that want to learn more about it and that aren't familiar with it, there's a couple of great books. Transformation of America by Kathy O'Brien. That's Kathy with a C, and it's trans, Trance, Formation of America. That is a seminal work on trauma-based mind control. And then also a woman named Bryce Taylor, whose real name is Susan Ford. She wrote a book called Thanks for the Memories, The Truth Shall Set Me Free, or Set You Free. And that book, I think it runs about $200-300 now to get a copy of it, because I think it's out of print. But that book names names. Both of these people had to go into hiding, and they had to have a lot of protection from people inside the intelligence communities to survive and get this information out to the public and to Congress.
No.
But those books were really, if you read them, it's really, really shocking and disillusioning, particularly when you hear the details of and the just horrific, disgusting stuff that they went through. So
Yeah.
when I first got exposed to that, it just shattered my worldview. And likewise, it's like sometimes when you see the ugly underbelly of how this planet works, which most people don't encounter, but when you're doing things to really help humanity, sometimes you do encounter that. So that's kind of what it was like talking to this security expert, when you start hearing the reality of how cold-blooded and callous these people are, and how there's like basically a network of assassins on this planet that will murder people for hire, and on and on and on. It's just like, ew.
Yeah, it's so
So
creepy that a lot of new age people don't even want to talk about it because to them it's all love and light. But I feel like it's important that we understand what's going on because we need to be able to counteract it, but to not be able to face the shadow. I mean,
Yeah, you can't not talk about it just because you think that's in a way participating in it. That's asinine.
right. Well,
precisely, there's a fine line between being aware of the dark side, understanding the dark side, and yet also not focusing on it. So, you do have to be aware of these things, but then you don't focus on them. You focus on creating an uplifting reality,
And
improving the planet.
As Stephen Wright says, there's a fine line between fishing and standing on the shore like an idiot. You've been listening to The Human Frequency. We will be back in hour 2 with our guest Ken Rohla.
welcome back. You are tuned to the Human Frequency. We are broadcasting live on American Freedom Radio, and we are here with our guest, Ken Rohla. And when we left, we were talking about mind control, which is a very common topic on this show, because if you don't control your own mind, else will control it for you. And we learned that from our other wonderful guest, Laurie McDonald, who talked about the ET influence on Earth. And I want to get a little more into the extraterrestrial element here because there's something behind all this mind control, and I have definitively traced it above human beings I've traced it above the UN. I've traced it above the
Yeah.
banking families. There's something more going on here, and I know it for a fact personally. Although, how can I prove it? I'm not trying to prove it, but I've had enough interactions to know. And our guest Ken has also had a reptilian encounter. So I just want to get right back into it. Ken, you had mentioned to me a book by William Tompkins who talked about the reptilian influence on Earth and how the humans have been mind controlled by reptilian beings since the Stone Age. I want to know, how are they doing this? How have they done it for so long? You know, this has been going on since before Wi-Fi and cell phones and cell towers. So what's going on with the reptilian influence and how have they been controlling us?
Yeah, what were their tactics?
Well, it's interesting. Originally I came across the concept of trauma-based mind control via Barbara Marciniak, who was a friend of mine who channeled Pleiadian material, and she had channeled a lot of stuff about it. And so that was my first exposure to it. And, at that time it was the very down-to-earth concept of governments using it, particularly the Nazi regime and the United States using it. And so that was my first exposure to it. And then a few years later, I wound up encountering 3 reptilian extraterrestrials in the woods in a very special place in North Carolina, like this power place. That was actually what it really was a scalar vortex that some people had created unwittingly. And in the course of encountering these reptilians, I had had telepathic communication with them for several years, and they were giving me a lot of information. And I kept saying, well, if you're really, not just me talking to myself in my head, then I have to meet you physically. And they said that, well, we can't do that because it would traumatize you too much, and it would thwart the work that we want to do with you. But I kept pressing it because I figured, if I don't see these, beings in the flesh, then I'm just talking to myself in my head, and maybe I'm loony. And so ultimately, I did wind up meeting these 3 reptilians with a witness. There was a guy with me at this place in North Carolina, out in the woods, and they had, by that point, they had given me a lot of information already, and a lot of stuff that actually I'm utilizing today. But at the time, it had no bearing whatsoever on my life. At the time, it was, they talked about Ormus, they talked about monoatomic gold, and how ETs used it for time travel and dimension travel, because monoatomic gold remains the same through different dimensions of time and space and things. So they gave me all this very esoteric information, and they did talk quite a lot about mind control, because I guess they understood that we're all mind controlled here on Earth, including myself. And you can't change something if you're not aware of it.
Right.
So I was introduced and schooled a lot on this concept, and also that it was these reptilian extraterrestrials that were behind it all. And they showed me things. They showed me images and visions and pictures of why this was. And what it boils down to is that these reptilians come from a culture kind of like reptilian, lizards and snakes and stuff here on Earth, where in their civilization, in their worlds, they are raised. They don't have a birthing process like humans do. They don't have children that are raised by parents. When a couple has fertilized eggs, they take them to a communal nursery, and those eggs are hatched in a communal nursery, and the babies are given just barely enough to survive, and they have to fight to get the resources and the food and everything over years to grow and evolve into an adult. And along the way, most of them die. And so it's this very, very traumatic experience. And just like here on Earth with, lizards and snakes and alligators or whatever, most of the babies don't survive. And the ones that do, they are very, very competitive. They're very fearful. They're very dominating and conquering. And so these reptilian extraterrestrials, their whole way of life, they have to be dominating and conquering and fearful and suspicious and all these kinds of things and competitive in order to survive and exist in their culture. Mm-hmm. And so from our viewpoint, that develops this kind of psychosis based in fear. and it's not a sustainable way of being. And their culture seems to understand it, but they don't, the majority of them do not know how to get out of it. And as a consequence, their culture is limited to certain realms of existence in reality. And they also are having a lot of difficulty, particularly now on Earth, because as the frequencies change on Earth and in this part of the galaxy, it is killing them off, so to speak. They can't continue to survive and operate in that fear frequency.
Yeah.
And so I understood that, they were telling me and showing me how these reptilians would come to a planet and they would start mind controlling people in order to make them fearful and competitive and warlike. But they didn't explain to me what William Tompkins came out with. William Tompkins was this man who worked in the NASA space program, the Apollo program. He also worked for a bunch of different space and military contractors like TRW and Douglas Aircraft and others, developing secret space program technology, developing spacecraft, developing, for example, the launch facilities for the Apollo program, and developing the entire long-term 30-year, three-stage Apollo program, which wound up not being fulfilled because of extraterrestrial involvement. But William Tompkins came out with a book. He's doing interviews now as well. He's 94 years old, and he says he's been authorized by his bosses in the military and space programs to come out with this information.
Oh, is this the
And he's giving a
disclosure
lot
we've
of
been told about then? This is disclosure?
Yes, it is disclosure, and it's some pretty mind-blowing disclosure because it's very recent, just within the last few months. He's been coming out with this and giving all these details about extraterrestrial involvement in the space program. For example, he says that that there were Nordic extraterrestrials working within the Apollo space program surreptitiously. They were masquerading as low-level employees and secretaries and things, but they were actually guiding the higher-ups into how to be successful to develop the Apollo space program. And he also mentions how the military-industrial complex of the United States and Germany and Nazi Germany were involved with these reptilian ETs and basically trading technology and other military advantages in exchange for developing clone armies and military hardware and space hardware to help these reptilians go out into space and conquer other worlds and other societies. But what I found really interesting was, and I had not heard this before even from these reptilians that I encountered, William Tompkins said that these reptilians, as a standard operating procedure, they will go to civilizations when they are at Stone Age level of development, and they will start mind controlling them very early on in their development so that they will become fearful and warlike and competitive, so that by the time they develop advanced technologies like we have now, the reptiles can then come back to that planet and encounter the warlike people who have developed these technologies and trade them even higher technology in exchange for developing armies and military and space hardware to help the reptilians go out into space and conquer other worlds.
Oh,
So it's
my.
kind of like their modus operandi. Yeah.
That's very, very heavy. The whole thing is just based on war and conquering. It doesn't make any sense from a human
Well, it's
perspective.
based in fear. Ultimately,
It's fear-based.
is the origin point for all of
I
this.
want the reptilians to start raising their own babies and having nice family lives.
Well, believe it or not, some of them want that. Some of them want that. These ones that were working with me, they were interested in that. They were studying the human birthing process, and actually they did a lot of merging with me to understand human emotion and the birthing process and how we nurture our young and those kinds of things, because they understand the more evolved ones. People want to categorize and classify these different types of ETs as all being bad or all being this or that. And that's nonsense. It's like human beings. If you look at human beings overall and what's going on this planet, yes, we're destroying the planet. Yes, we're warlike. Yes, we're polluting. Yes, we're doing all these negative things. But it's not everybody.
Right.
There's a lot of people who are very uplifting and service to others. They're doing a lot of good on this planet. The same thing with all these different extraterrestrial races. So these particular reptilians I encountered were benevolent ones that were working with other types of ETs, and they were being educated in the process of the birthing process, the nurturing process, and all these things, and emotion, so they could understand emotion. And the more evolved reptilians that I encountered, they understood this actually better than I did in some ways, because they had reached a point of development where they were aware of their lifetimes as human beings and other types of life forms. So they were not just aware of the reptilian life that they were in, they were aware of other lifetimes where they had been human and other life forms. So they
Oh.
could tap into that knowledge and awareness. So they schooled me a lot on how to be a human being on a day-to-day basis. And that was some of the most valuable information that I got from them, was just like, you know, day-to-day logistics.
How
Like,
interesting that they can be so varied in their understandings, just like us. And I wonder if those reptilians that you met were in any danger for their beliefs, just as humans like us are in danger every day for sharing the truth.
well, I don't know if they were in any danger, but they were certainly rebels. I mean, they did explain that they were definitely rebels, and they were working with a band of rebels of a lot of different kinds of ETs. I mean, they introduced me, let's say, in the meditation state or the non-physical state, to insectoid-looking ETs. You know, ETs that look like praying mantises, ETs that look like varieties of what people would call grays, Pleiadians who were human looking, and other types of ETs, Arcturians that looked human. So they were working together, and they were all basically rebels. They were not the typical people from their various races.
That actually
And that's what
matches
it's going
up
to take.
quite succinctly with what Laurie McDonald was telling us about as far as the descriptions are concerned.
Yeah, it's completely actually the same. Like the mantis people, she knows all of them too. There's so many people who have seen this now that I know there has to be truth in this. I've only had
Well, in my
etheric encounters myself, not visual, except that one thing that flew next to the car that night.
That's true.
That was odd.
We've talked about that
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, well, I mean, the truth is that there are millions of people who have had these kinds of encounters of various types, and most people don't want to talk about it, understandably, because you're vilified, you're ridiculed, and also it's very bad for you in pretty much every way you can imagine. It's bad for business, it's bad for you at work, your family thinks you're nuts, you know, that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, the
And
stigma that's
so,
attached to it is so ingrained that, who would risk not only the humiliation, but also it would cause further trauma to be embedded, even further. And it's just it's an obstacle on so many different
Right,
levels.
right.
exactly, it's like, for example, you know, years ago I didn't talk about this stuff publicly, because I knew that it would invalidate the work that I was doing teaching natural health. And because people would be like, well, you know, that natural health stuff sounds great, but this guy's crazy. And therefore they throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yep.
Um, but, you know, ultimately it was actually David Wolf who inspired me to come out and talk about this stuff, because he had written a book called Amazing Grace. And in that book, he talked about some of these types of encounters that he had had, and some of this more esoteric stuff. And I figured, well, if David Wolf is brave enough to put it there in writing, then I should get out and start talking about what I've experienced. And it has very much been to my detriment. I mean, I have to say, there are a lot of people who would like to work with me but won't, because they're worried about their image publicly. And they, you know, a lot of times they have lots and lots of money. In some cases, people that are billionaires who, you know, will, behind the scenes, they will work with me. They'll use my technologies. They acknowledge the validity of it all, but they will not talk with me in public about it. They will not do business with me publicly and that kind of stuff. And so I'm not trying to get attention. It's not the kind of attention anybody wants. It's not good attention to
No,
be
I
had.
agree. I wish I could just be, just the
But
status
if,
quo too sometimes and not get all this attention on me. But that's just the way it is
yeah,
when you're a
life's
truth
much
teller,
easier.
That
right?
is that is a
Well,
very
and that's it. I mean,
temporary, ephemeral wish.
well, that's it. I mean, if nobody talks about this stuff, then nothing's ever going to change. And, you know, I had the fortune of working and living with Coretta Scott King and the Martin Luther King's family for a time. And, you know, and they were a great example of people who stood up for the betterment of humanity to extreme uh, difficulty, you know, bombing of their house and the murder of their father and husband and those kinds of things. And those people were willing to take that on for the betterment of humanity. And look where we are because of it. We continue, of course, to have governments trying to create racial strife. But in despite of that, we still have most people who recognize the stupidity of racism and social injustice. And so, the world isn't going to change if we don't have brave people stand up and talk about this stuff. And I don't care what people think about me. I've been fortunate that I've always been able to have a good living and have a good life. And I have had some death threats and things. I've had to go into hiding. I've had friends murdered and things like that for working with free energy and stuff. But ultimately, I cannot not share the truth of what my experience has been.
Everybody who has worked in free energy has dealt with these kinds of threats. I've noticed, and in fact, I've been reading up on Reich's volumes, all of his volumes. I'm reading everything he's ever done, and now I'm reading the core volumes, which were these bulletins he'd put out periodically. And in one of them, he mentioned an orgone motor that he was working on, using orgone energy to generate electricity, and the student that was working on that project mysteriously disappeared, and this happens over and over again with anybody who works.
It's not just suppression,
energy.
But it's disappeared or being disappeared.
Well, I want to ask about free energy because you have a lot of amazing ideas on this. But first off, I got to ask you this. Do you know if my electric utility company is just making up the bill every month? Because it makes no sense. I mean, one month to the next, I can't wrap my head around what they think I'm using. It's incongruous.
Yeah, and it depends on, what kind of meter you have and how they're calculating your bill. It varies. I'm in a town where the local municipality actually is in charge of the power supply, and they do it on a kilowatt hour based rate. But I don't know how they calculate. I haven't looked at that. Some people will have bill averaging where they'll pay a fixed amount every month. But I do know that with smart meters, I've got a couple of smart meters actually. I was given a couple of smart meters by a power company lineman, and so I dissected one.
Oh,
and,
awesome.
examined it, yeah. And they definitely, they've got a lot of stuff built into programmable chips that are not easy to analyze, but they most certainly, they're collecting all kinds of usage data. And it's been proven, for example, by a couple of professors at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, that you can not only can you analyze the data and see, for example, what kinds of appliances people are using in their house and what their usage patterns are and when they're home and not home and those kinds of things, but you can even see what people are watching on television by analyzing that data, which I was really surprised about.
They can tell what program you're watching.
They can tell when someone's watching about the Kardashians versus when they're watching the football game. Like that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Wow, that's so personal. Yeah. I don't want people knowing I'm watching the Kardashians.
Neither do I.
That's embarrassing.
I mean, if they know I'm watching football, that's one thing, but not the Kardashians. That can't get out.
Exactly.
Wait, are we on the air right now?
Exactly.
We got to cut. Hold on.
Exactly. Yeah, so I don't know, I don't know what's calculating, what's going into the calculations of your power bill, but
well, we don't have a smart meter. We opted out of the smart meter.
Yeah.
So we have an analog.
We have a dumb meter.
But the analog meter, who knows? My theory is that they're charging us more than we're using.
My theory is that they're not even coming out to read the damn thing. They're just pulling a number out of a hat or something along those lines, and they pay that amount. It doesn't seem to
I don't know,
bear any.
They overcharged me so many times that last month I had a credit balance. So I think that what happens is they estimate the bill a lot of the time with us opt-out folks. They don't want to come out and read the meter. They've fired all the meter readers, so they estimate it every month. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, that could be that they only come out and read it periodically, less than once a month. That could certainly be. Mm-hmm. Where I'm at, I actually have an old mechanical meter still that's probably, 20, 30 years old. And I welded a cage over my meter so nobody can replace it without, my say-so.
Good deal.
And no one has ever approached me about it. No one has ever said anything from the power company. They just keep letting it run. But the real issue is not how they're calculating the power. The real issue is the fact that the power industry has kept this antiquated, centralized method of energy production in place far, far too long. And I found out, for example, back in the early 90s when I started working with free energy technology, that the power companies, for example, they will buy technology industries, for example, motor manufacturers or heat pump manufacturers, or they will go in business with them and they will produce motors that are very out of tune, that will consume more power than normal, or heat pumps, for example, that will actually consume more energy than a normal heat pump. And so, particularly when you look at these programs that power companies have where they will finance a heat pump, for their customers, and they put really good terms on the financing. Well, the reason they do that is because those heat pumps are very inefficient. They're designed to be inefficient and consume more energy. So the power companies spin all these lies about how they care about saving energy and blah, 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 but that's an absolute lie.
Yep.
They do everything in their power for people to consume more energy and, of course, be more dependent on them.
Of course.
And meanwhile, suppressing free energy technologies, because, for example, one of my colleagues who developed the most efficient heat pump in the world and was working with a man named Yul Brown on water field technology, the power companies in Washington State tried to kill him. And so, it's not like they're just not telling the public, they're actively suppressing it with murder and things like that.
It's insane considering that all these people suppressing these technologies would benefit so much from them. And I know that we'll see free energy in our lifetimes because it's coming out more and more. This is fascinating to many people. Tesla's work is becoming very mainstream. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about free energy devices and where is the future of power for our homes. You had mentioned to me a $40 Farberware hot plate that could be used to generate free energy and even powered up enough to do a whole building. So can you talk a little bit about what can we use for free energy and how can we apply it in our homes?
And I'm going to go get $40 real quick.
Yeah, right. I want to get that hot plate.
Yeah, and I use the term free energy loosely because it really isn't totally free. You still got to pay for it, but you don't have to pay through some centralized service and pay too much, compared to what we've been paying. So, some scientists, engineers, technical people out there may take issue with the idea or the name free energy. But what we're talking about basically is energy that can be produced extremely efficiently, extremely cheaply, and basically free the world from pollution and clean up the pollution that we have. And I've worked with a lot of those technologies. So, we'll talk about the Farberware hot plate, but let me get into some of my history with this stuff and some of the fundamentals, because I first got introduced to this stuff back in the early 90s when I met a man named Yul Brown who had developed water fuel technology. And Brown was following in the footsteps of a man named William A. Rhodes, who developed a device in the early 60s that would generate a gaseous phase of water that was not steam. We know conventionally about the three phases of water being ice, liquid, and steam. Well, there's a fourth phase. There's actually more than four phases of water, but there's a fourth phase where you can basically take water and pulse electricity through it in a very specific way, in a very specific mechanism, and you can develop resonance and bring energy into the system from other dimensions of space-time, or what people would call zero-point energy, and develop large amounts of energy that will shatter the H2O molecules into oxygen and hydrogen, which is then recombined into a different geometric form that's known as HHO, or also known as Brown's gas after Yul Brown. So other people, William A. Rhodes, there were many people before William A. Rhodes. It really goes all the way back to at least the 1800s with John Keeley and others. But William Rhodes developed this technique in the 60s, and I don't know if he knew that he wouldn't be able to bring it out as a fuel, so he brought it out as a welder, because when you burn a flame on this water, it burns with a normal blue flame that looks like something from a gas stove or a torch, but it has really weird quantum properties. And when you burn something with it, it actually reacts at the atomic level with the material burning. And so, for example, Yule Brown was able to use it in a welding form to weld any material to any other material. You could weld plastic to metal, or glass to wood, or ceramic to metal, or anything. It's like you could weld anything to anything.
It's
with
better
this
than super glue.
device. It really is. I had one of these devices for a couple of weeks back in the 90s and played around with it. And it was absolutely amazing how it would weld anything to anything. And it would even sublimate tungsten. Tungsten is what they make light bulb filaments out of, and it's extremely hard to melt, and it takes extremely high temperatures.
And
I think
sublimation
it's like 5,000, 6,000.
sublimation is the process of turning a solid directly to a gas, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And normally that takes like, I think 5,000, 6,000, maybe 5,009, 8,009, something like that. Many thousands of degrees of temperature to do that. But this Brown's gas would do it really quickly and simply with a small amount of energy, because it was reacting at the atomic level with this stuff. But you could take radioactive elements, for example, or radioactive waste, and you could burn it with other metals like aluminum, I think, and some others. And it would actually alter the radioactive elements at the atomic level and change them into a different element, and that would be non-radioactive. So it effectively and very quickly neutralized radioactive waste or radioactive elements.
So why do we have
And
all this
Brown
nuclear waste on our planet?
Well, because if you do that, I mean, Brown actually did this. He did demonstrated this in front of large audiences in stadiums and in front of Department of Energy officials and senators and politicians, and proving it with instrumentation and measuring equipment. But the reason that it's not out is because, well, first of all, it's not the only technology that can do this. As I have mentioned in other occasions, there are at least 61 patents for methods for neutralizing radioactivity completely or partially all around Earth, including 8 in Japan. That's just the patented technologies. So we've had for many, many decades methods for neutralizing radioactivity. The reason that they're not allowed out, the reason that they're consistently and continually suppressed, is because first of all, if you can neutralize radioactivity, then you could, for example, fly over nuclear bomb silos, nuclear missile silos, and neutralize them, which in fact happens.
Wow.
There are, as Dr. Stephen Greer has shown with the many, military insiders and space program insiders that he's brought out and testified, these people have testified over and over again that UFOs will fly over these missile silos and neutralize them, just with energy beams or energy fields. And so we can do the same thing, with this Brown's gas technology, or there are certain scalar energy technologies that can do it. But it's not allowed out because that would be the end of the nuclear weapons industry, and the countries that have that nuclear advantage are not about to let that go.
Of course.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's kind of missing the point, though. Like, if I were in front of demonstrating for politicians and senators and energy department people, I would just pull down my pants and moon them. I would take advantage of that opportunity head on. But those are exactly the kinds of people that you don't want to be presenting this information to. It's no different, in my mind, than Wilhelm Reich reporting his findings to the government and complaining to the LA Times that they weren't reporting the rainfall statistics accurately.
Well, they were in touch with the Weather Bureau, and they were also in touch with the Air Force, he and his crew, and he really believed that our government was benevolent and not in contract with ETs and not, out there to manipulate us, mind control us, and change the weather. He really thought that they'd want to know about these problems with the ETs.
Oh, absolutely.
And, he really was.
Rather than contributing to the subjugation of humanity.
Well, he was very genuine and very naive in all this, but he really wanted to help, and he thought that going through our government would help.
And I see this time and time again of people trying to present these ideas to precisely the wrong groups of people.
You know, we talked about this last time with Ken about the Kesh Foundation, about how Kesh Free Energy sounds like a great idea, but he wants to work in collaboration with the UN and with governments, and these are the very entities that are suppressing the free energy.
Yeah, it's like my forehead just does a free fall and slams into the desk when I hear about this.
Well, but when you actually have these technologies, and of course, you know, what I've seen is that the awareness of how to get this out has evolved. Like Kesh, even though, you know, Kesh went to these official organizations, he also, before he ever did that, he went behind the scenes to hundreds of corporations and people with money and power that were not part of the status quo infrastructure, and he gave them the technology. For example, Samsung, he gave them his technology years before he ever went public with it so that they could develop it privately, so that if the political environment was such to where it could be brought out, they would already have it. So we don't know the full story of what goes on, first of all, with these people, because they can't be out on the 6 o'clock news talking about this stuff. You know, it's like I do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Like people are always emailing me and saying, when are you going to come out with this and when are you going to come out with that? And they don't understand that I'm working all kinds of stuff behind the scenes that I never talk about.
Yeah, you
and
can't talk about
it.
it. Even in what we do, we can't talk about everything. And we're not even working on the level that you're at. But we can't talk about everything. And a lot of people are naive to think that it's okay to just blab about it. But it really isn't. We have to stay safe while we're doing this
Yeah,
work.
you have to keep in mind the consequences of your actions. And that transcends levels. It doesn't matter what level you're on. You have to be mindful of these things.
You know, Wilhelm Reich was in the news. I've been reading the news articles about his weather modification work and his georestoration work back then. And to be in the news is like putting a target on your back.
Mm-hmm.
True, but it also can be protection. You know, it's like Stephen Greer's approach of being extremely public. And the more people that you make aware of all of this stuff that understand it, then the safer you are. And this is where historically people made mistakes like Yul Brown, where you have to understand you can spend 40 years or 50 years developing a technology and you've sacrificed, you know, your life and your, you know, sometimes your marriages and things like this to bring this out to the world, and you need to get paid. You got to pay the bills, you got to feed yourself, those kinds of things. And in some cases, people want to make $1 billion off of it or whatever, but and most of the time, these people just want to serve humanity, but they need to make a living at the same time. And so they're seeking, sometimes they seek patents on it, sometimes they're seeking ways of making money off of it. And this is where they fail. And this is where people like Kesh and the newer generations of people understand the only way this stuff is going to get out is if it's given away. You're not going to be able to patent it or control it or centralize it and make $1 billion off of it. You're going to have to give it all away for free and open source it, and so that it's so ubiquitous and so many people know about it. It doesn't matter if they stomp out the originator of it because so many people know about it and it's on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you know, it's like Brown's gas is all over YouTube now. There are tons of people showing how to make it, and it's so well known now that it really can't be stopped. And this is how it will get out, and this is how things are changing. And so, you know, even though it's not being announced on the mainstream news or even the alternative news a lot of times, there are many, many, many people who know how to make free energy now. And this is one of the things that you wanted me to talk about was this idea of making free energy with a $40 for Farberware hot plate.
I love it. I love it. You know, there's news stories about kids doing science projects now where they're generating free energy for their science projects. So this is definitely getting out.
Well, I mean, that's it. When you understand that, you know, we're taught in conventional physics and engineering that there are no perpetual motion machines, that you can't break the laws of physics. But the truth is the laws of physics that we're taught in school, a lot of them are based on fundamentally flawed concepts and information. And it's not that they're wrong per se in functionality, but they're incomplete, and our understanding of it is incomplete very often. And so the truth is that when you look at, there are forces in nature like gravitation or flotation or magnetism. You know, if you've got a magnet, you've got a continual push or a pull. You think nobody's figured out how to harness that to turn it into usable energy?
I've seen it on YouTube.
That's ridiculous.
I've seen magnets used as free energy devices on YouTube. I do that search too, free energy. It's a fun search.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, John Searle, who's an Oxford University professor, he developed a magnetic motor back in the 60s that not only can generate huge amounts of electricity very simply, but it also can neutralize radioactivity, and it can even create space travel and time travel, where he takes these very special magnets that he developed and he puts them in concentric rings and he spins them around in opposite directions, and it opens up a black hole.
My
And if you do it
goodness.
fast enough and strong enough, it's well, what we've been talking about black holes is there's a lot of misconception there as well. Everybody thinks that a black hole is this big, vortex out in the universe that sucks all light and matter into it and crushes it down into infinite nothingness. Well, you can have black holes of different sizes and intensities. And I've actually was with a yogi one time who showed me how to make a black hole with my hands right out in the middle of a
Yeah,
room.
you kids don't try that at home.
Yeah, we can. Yeah,
Well,
we
it
can't
wasn't
actually
harmful. It
create
was.
black holes. It's in our lease. We can't do it.
Yeah,
Once
well,
the lease
actually, we've got
expires, then we're greenlit on
we
that.
have we've got black holes throughout our body. The truth is, the universe is a web of black holes. So they're all over the place, but they're different sizes and intensities, and they have varying properties. But one of their properties is, in certain cases, they're endothermic, so they absorb energy and they appear cold. So anyway, this Searle magnetic motor, when it's revved up, it can create a singularity that will expand around. Let's say you put it inside of a saucer-shaped vessel, you can expand this singularity around the entire craft. And when you do that inside of a singularity or a black hole, the laws of physics do not exist in the way that they do in regular three-dimensional space. And so you can basically blink these spacecraft out of one place and have them show up somewhere else, many light years away instantaneously. Or they can be propelled through space kind of like a conventional craft, but because they have no resistance or momentum or inertia, they can go 60,000 miles an hour and circumnavigate the globe in 30 minutes. And they can travel so fast that to the human eye, standing outside of the singularity, they look, well, you can't see them because they're going so fast. But when you're in the craft, it feels like you're sitting still. And this is what insiders have shown me, and they've actually they've demonstrated this. And actually, Searle built 44 of these anti-gravity flying saucers for the U.S. military privately. So when you start working in these realms, you encounter scientists and inventors who are working sometimes with the military-industrial complex, sometimes with extraterrestrials. I've encountered a bunch of scientists and inventors who have had ET contact of various kinds, and very often we're getting information and downloads from these ETs in order to help humanity. And so that's kind of the reality of it. But getting back to the Farberware hot plate, so I was at the Tesla Tech conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico in late July this year, and they have all kinds of free energy technologies being presented there. But very often, as what happens at these conferences, you will see more interesting stuff off stage than you do on stage. And so there was a man there who I befriended, and we really resonated with each other, and we were sharing a lot of information. And so he showed me how to make what scientists would call an over unity device with a Farberware hot plate, where you basically get one of these inductive hot plates. It's not a hot plate that gets hot. It's one of these that creates an electric field or a magnetic field that will induce heat into special ferrous pans that have iron in them. And so you've seen these stoves before where the burners don't get hot, but the pans will get hot. And that's an inductive cook range. It's called inductive heating. And so this Farberware hot plate is just a standalone inductive hot plate. And instead of putting a pan on it, you can actually put a Tesla pancake coil, which is a flat spiral type coil, on this inductive hot plate, and it will generate anywhere from 2 to 5 times more energy coming out of the Tesla coil than what's going into the hot plate.
Is the coil
So
to be
you
made
could,
of
for
iron?
example,
By the way, is it iron coil?
no,
Okay, so it's a copper
No, no,
coil?
the coil does not. It could be copper, it could be any metal.
Okay.
Um, but it will, because of the structure of a Tesla pancake coil, also known as a bifilar coil, it will induce current in the Tesla coil and bring 0 point energy or scalar energy into the system, and that will emit more electricity coming out of the Tesla coil than what's going into the hot plate. So you could, for example, use that concept and power the hot plate or a larger device based on that idea. You could power it with solar panels, for example, and you know reduce your power bill by 80%, or use 80% less solar panels and spend a lot less money to generate enough power to power a house or whatever. Or you could just use a ramped up version of it to power an air conditioner or a refrigerator or whatever and reduce your power bill.
So how can we
Um,
apply it? How can we somehow attach this to the, I never know how to attach these things to the power source of the home.
Well, I would start out, go buy one of these $40 Farberware, and it needs to be the Farberware brand inductive hot plate.
They also make
Get
quality
one of
pots.
those. They do. And that's what this man said. He said he's tried different inductive hot plates, but Farberware, the quality is better than the other ones. And so the other ones wouldn't work, but the Farberware did. But if you can go online and just Google Tesla bifilar coil or Tesla pancake coil, and you'll see how to build one. And you can just make it out of plain old, insulated wire. I mean, this guy took a power cord from a lamp and just wrapped it up in the form of a Tesla pancake coil, and he had 2 times over unity coming out of it, just with this ridiculously simple and really poorly made Tesla coil. If you want to be fancy, you can use printed circuit boards to make Tesla coils and have them nice, and have the traces or the wires with very specific dimensions, diameters, and things, and tweak it. But it's really that simple. I mean, anybody with a little mechanical abilities can do this. Just put a Tesla pancake coil down a Farber hot plate, play with the concept, tweak the concept, and then you can ramp it up in scale to power other things.
So how do you draw that power to the other devices? Let's say you want to power a lamp or a stereo or something like that.
Okay, well, you take your Tesla coil with your hot plate and you experiment with it in the structure of the Tesla coil so that you get the desired voltage and amperage coming out of it, and it's going to be DC voltage. And so then you would use an AC DC inverter to convert the energy to AC power. And basically, let's say that you want to power, let's just say your lights at 120 volts. So you would just hook the Tesla coil up, the outputs of the Tesla coil to your lighting system, and it would power it. And there are other variations of this that you could do as well. You could, for example, there's something called a Bedini motor, which is a free energy motor that is basically another magnetic motor that spins a wheel based on permanent magnets. But instead of generating electricity, that motor will generate scalar waves, which you can then send into a battery. And the electrochemical process of the battery in combination with the scalar waves will charge the battery, and it will actually desulfate and repair the battery. So you can basically have a battery that never goes bad and is constantly being charged. And then you can take that battery and run the Bedini motor, and there's excess energy left over because you're bringing 0 point energy into the battery through the electrochemical process of sending scalar waves into it. And Bedini did this. This is not like some perpetual motion machine that, conceptually doesn't work, because in physics, we're taught you can't do this. You can't, for example, take a battery and power a generator, power a motor to spin a generator, and then have the generator power the battery, and then it's a continuous perpetual motion machine. That doesn't work. Over time, resistance and things will kill it off. But when you're using scalar energy in this kind of a system, you're bringing 0 point energy in, you're bringing in scalar energy from, let's say, other dimensions of space-time and converting it into electrochemical potential. And in that kind of a circuit, you can have a perpetual motion machine. And John Bedini proved this. This is not me just saying this. And if you want to see the evidence of it, or if you want to see how to build this, You can go to Tom Bearden's website, which is chenier.org. Let me see if I can spell that for you.
This is
It's
great.
C.
I'm very
Yeah,
handy.
Yeah,
it's
this is
I'm
good
going to do
stuff.
this. I just need the instructions.
yeah. I mean, truly, I mean, anybody can do the hot plate thing. It's really, really simple. Um, Tom Bearden's website is cheniere.org. I believe it's pronounced Chenier or Chenier. Um, but just Google Tom Bearden, and he sells these DVDs called the Energy in a Vacuum series, and there's probably 6 or 8 of them on the Bedini motor, and they have interviews with John Bedini, who died recently, by the way. And they're showing this stuff. They're demonstrating. They've got the instrumentation hooked up to it, and you can do what they do and test it, and you can generate free energy as well. And there are many, many free energy devices out there that you can build yourself.
Hmm. And I really feel that we're getting to that point in time where this stuff is really starting to get out there in a way that can no longer be suppressed. But Ken, I've been itching to ask you for a while now. I feel that the dogmatic behavior of the mainstream scientific community or physics community or any other segment of that population, I feel that sort of behavior that they exhibit and are exhibiting more and more these days is really just kind of discrediting themselves. Like it's almost
Dogma.
yeah, that's I can't really expand on that further. It's just they're damaging themselves with that sort of
It's
behavior.
like a religion.
But yeah, and it's really just the repetition of denial over and over again with nothing to back it. Whereas people like you, Ken, are putting the evidence out there. And I've always said that there is no such thing as proof. There is only evidence, because some jerk can just say over and over and over again, "Oh, that's not true. That's not true." And, you know how the naysayers are. They get in that frame of mind and they can't get out of it. They're a broken record, and they're just on that same trip indefinitely. So I wanted to know, how do you specifically deal with the dogma of the naysayers in the scientific communities that you deal with on a daily basis?
Well, I ignore them. I mean, you're always going to have detractors and naysayers. And I also remember, though, I remember back in the day when I didn't know about this stuff, and I was, living my life based on what I was taught in school on these flawed precepts. And I wasn't an evil person, and I wasn't an industry shill or anything. I just believed what I was taught. And so I remember that about people. I remember that, most people are not, they don't have any diabolical motives. It's just that they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know that they don't know it. And particularly when you're highly educated and highly indoctrinated into a mode of operation and knowledge, like let's say a PhD in a particular science, there's a lot, there are many, many years and a lot of foundation of evidence to support that viewpoint. And there's also the practical applications of that demonstrating that it works. So for example, I mean, based on the kinds of stuff I was taught in engineering school, you can build a stereo or a television or whatever. It works. But because it's not fully understood, there are fundamental flaws at the root of it that keep you from going beyond a certain level with it. And so, for example, you may be able to make a cell phone understanding conventional electronics and physics and engineering. But for example, particularly with a cell phone, the fractal antenna had to be developed in order for a cell phone to even work, which is a whole nother story. But if you understand the scalar physics, for example, you can make a cell phone that will operate with perfect clarity at any distance in the universe. So, you could have somebody on Mars and somebody on Earth talking to each other via a scalar cell phone with perfect clarity and no static or interruptions.
This is going to make the Facebook problem
So,
worse, though.
That's true.
If you get people from Mars involved, can you think about like the conflicts that may
Facebook
emerge?
for Martians.
Yeah, it might just be
well,
we'll get too addicted.
well, the truth is that, the more sophisticated a technology is, the more simple it appears on the surface. And so all of these technological constructs that we've made outside of ourselves, whether it's social media or computers or the internet or cell phones or whatever, TV, all of this stuff, they're simply manifestations of consciousness at a certain level where we believe that we need these things outside of us to perform these functions. The truth is, when you go beyond that and you develop consciousness to a greater degree, you can have telepathic communication anywhere in the cosmos, and you have no need for transmission wires or wireless technology or any of these technologies, because your own biology is the most supreme technology in the cosmos. And we have not evolved to that point yet. We're still creating these things outside of ourselves. But just think back to the 1800s, when the steam engine was the power of the day. It was the engine of the day. And the concepts that we use right now, like a cell phone. I mean, back in the 60s when I was a kid, only Dick Tracy had a wrist phone where you could talk to people.
For me, it was Inspector Gadget.
Yeah, so
same trench coat.
But all of this technology, yeah, all this technology that we have created and evolved outside of ourselves are a construct, because fundamentally we're at a point in our evolution where we believe that we have to create this stuff outside of ourselves. The more sophisticated people on this planet historically who have evolved beyond that, who we would call the shamans and the gurus and the swamis and the masters and the teachers at very elevated levels, these people understood this, and they didn't need to rely on these things. And in fact, even to this day, it's like Yogi Raj Gurunath Siddhanath, for example, was an Indian guru who I have met many people who have seen him levitate, they've seen him bilocate. And when you can do those kinds of things, what the hell do you need a cell phone for? This guy can be in India and show up in somebody's car and talk to them.
They've seen him levitate, but they've never seen him.
Oh, yeah.
But they've never seen him like anything on Facebook, and that's a good thing, I think.
Precisely.
Ken, we have learned so much from this interview, as we always do. This has been just a treasure trove of info.
I know.
Please,
we only have a couple minutes.
Yeah, we only have a couple
Yeah.
minutes. Please give your website, place where people can contact you, please.
Okay. Well, my main website is freshandalive.com, and that has links to my Facebook page, my Twitter page, my YouTube channel, and my blog. My blog is probably where the most information is that I have, which is freshandaliveblog.com. And I'm also on Facebook, and so I post stuff. Lately, I haven't been on Facebook much because I've had a lot of hurricane cleanup to do. But yeah, I'm out there on Facebook as well.
Do you have any events coming up?
I don't actually, but I'm intending to do an online webinar in the next few weeks, and I do have some new YouTube videos coming out. Like I said, that talk that I recently did about the physics of consciousness, which was very well received, by the way, it will be on YouTube in the next few days.
I'm very excited to see that talk, and I think you really tied it all together tonight. I want to thank you again for being with us for a third time on the Human Frequency, Ken.
It's my pleasure. Anytime.
And we'll have you on several more times in the future, I'm sure.
There's always something to talk about. I feel like you're always giving us something new.
And that's it for this time. Please tune in next time. You've been listening to The Human Frequency. Thank you for tuning in, and have a good night.